I'm tired of seeing you every day." The words, flat and devoid of warmth, struck Sierra like a physical blow, a sudden brutal slap in the silent, festive air of her own homestead. Her breath hitched a sharp intake that scraped against her ribs, but she didn't flinch. Her gaze, steady and unwavering, locked onto her son, Caleb, searching for any flicker of hesitation, any tremor of regret in his handsome, rigid face. There was none. Only a chilling, resolute certainty. And in that same instant, a colder certainty solidified within her, a silent, unyielding truth that the deed to this land, tucked away in a locked steel box in her study, bore only one name. Hers. The smell of cold prairie wind still clung to Sierra's heavy wool coat as she stepped inside the sprawling ranch house. From the frosted panes of the windows, the living room glowed with a misleading warmth, the Christmas tree a cascade of gold and soft, twinkling lights. But the silence inside was a living thing, thick and suffocating, too heavy for the season. Caleb stood by the stone fireplace, arms folded across his chest, his shoulders tense beneath the tailored fabric of his shirt. Caleb Sierra greeted softly, her voice barely disturbing the quiet. She shifted the grocery bags in her arms, the crisp paper crinkling. "I brought the staples you asked for." He didn't move, didn't even acknowledge the bags. His eyes, usually so bright with an easy charm, were shadowed, his jaw tight. "Mother." He began, his tone low, deliberate. "I need to tell you something." The words were a sudden, invisible barrier stopping her mid-step. The grocery bags suddenly felt heavy, unwieldy. "What is it?" He swallowed hard, his gaze darting to the grand staircase, then quickly back to her. "Serafina and I, we need space." Space. The word echoed hollow in the quiet house. Space. In the home she had built, brick by painstakingly chosen brick on land she had tilled and cultivated with her own hands. In the house where he had taken his first steps, where his father had held him high, laughing. Space. Sierra repeated, her voice remarkably calm. A still pool, masking an ocean's turmoil. She set the grocery bags on the polished oak counter, each movement precise, unhurried. Her hands, though trembling subtly, remained steady. "Is that what this is? You feel crowded by the person who gave you this roof, this life." Caleb shifted, uncomfortable. His eyes strayed once more to the staircase. Serafina wasn't visible, but her presence was a palpable force, a faint, sweet scent of lilac perfume lingering in the air, a silent confirmation that this decision, this cold pronouncement, was hers, speaking through him. "Mother, don't turn this into guilt," he muttered, rubbing the back of his neck. His borrowed courage, she noted, was already beginning to fray. "We're adults now. We just want to live our life." "You already do," Sierra countered softly, her gaze unwavering. "Rent-free for 3 years under a roof I paid for." He flinched, a subtle tightening around his eyes. "It doesn't feel like it." He mumbled, his voice a petulant whine, not the confident baritone she had once known. Sierra studied him. Her son, her blood. The nervous breathing, the slump of his shoulders, the telltale sign of a man hiding behind someone else's words. My son, who once hid behind me during storms, now hid behind his wife's silken pronouncements. "So this is what space means," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. Not a question, but a quiet, chilling statement. Removing the one person who made this house possible. His lips pressed into a thin line, a mirror of Serafina's own stubborn set. "It's better for everyone. Better for Serafina. For both of us," he insisted, avoiding her gaze. Sierra stepped closer, close enough for him to see the absence of anger in her eyes, only a profound, unsettling clarity. "You're free to need what you need, Caleb. But understand this. Every timber in these walls, every flagstone on this hearth came from my toil, my choices. You and your wife have enjoyed this prosperity without contribution for 3 years. He didn't answer. His silence was a confession, heavy and undeniable. The red and green lights of the Christmas tree blinked between them, stark against the stillness. Outside, a fresh flurry of snow began to fall, soft flakes dusting the windows. She picked up one of the gift bags she'd carried in a small, elegant bag, holding a cashmere scarf she had chosen for Serafina. She placed it gently on the counter. "You can give this to her yourself." "Mother," Sierra raised a hand, stopping him. "Don't. You've made yourself abundantly clear." He took a small step forward, his brow furrowed. "I didn't mean to hurt you, but you just did." The air between them thickened, taut and fragile. From upstairs, she heard the faint creak of a floorboard. Serafina listening. Always listening, always calculating. Sierra walked to the antique coat rack by the front door, her movements calm, deliberate, each motion measured. She reached for her own coat, a sturdy, practical garment. "Where are you going?" Caleb asked, his voice suddenly quick-laced with a bewildered anxiety. "For a walk. It's freezing. It matches the atmosphere," she replied, buttoning her coat. He blinked, unsure if she was jesting. She wasn't. She wrapped her scarf around her neck, a familiar comfort. She looked at him once more, her gaze sweeping over the features that were so like his father's, yet held none of his warmth. "You know, when you were 10, you begged me not to sell this ranch after your father died. You said it was home." He looked down, unable to meet her gaze. "Things change." "Yes," Sierra replied, her voice soft as the falling snow. "They do." She took her car keys from the ceramic bowl by the door. "You want space, Caleb? You'll have plenty." He reached out his hand, hovering in the air, hesitant. "Mother, maybe we can talk later." "No." Her voice was calm, but imbued with a chilling finality. "You wanted peace. So do I." For a second, he stood there speechless. Perhaps he expected tears. Arguments, desperate pleas for explanation. But Sierra wasn't the kind of woman who begged to stay where she wasn't respected. She opened the front door, and the winter wind rushed in sharp and honest, carrying the scent of pine and frost. "Lock up after me," she told him, her voice carrying over the wind. "You're still under my roof for now." His face tightened, a flicker of something akin to panic in his eyes, as he belatedly realized he had pushed the wrong person. Sierra stepped outside. Snow crunched under her sensible leather boots. Behind her, the heavy oak door closed softly, the latch clicking with the definitive sound of a sentence concluded. The street, lined with dormant oak trees, was empty quiet, save for the faint hum of distant Christmas lights from a neighbor's porch. She walked to her sturdy pickup truck without looking back. Inside, she sat for a moment, gloved hands resting on the steering wheel, the leather cool beneath her touch. No tears, no trembling, only the steady rhythm of her own breathing. He thought he had taken control tonight. He hadn't. The snow kept falling, blurring the edges of the world. The lights from the house glowed faintly in her rearview mirror, then disappeared as she turned the key and pulled away. By the time she reached the winding country road at the corner of her property, she already knew what she would do next. Sierra returned to the house hours later, the chill of the night having seeped deep into her bones. She entered her study and closed the door quietly, the click soft, deliberate. The faint warmth from the downstairs living room didn't reach here. The silence was absolute clear, like a freshly laundered linen sheet waiting to be written on. She took off her gloves, placing them neatly on the polished surface of her antique roll-top desk. Her reflection in the dark window looked back at her steady, resolute, not sad. She watched the woman who had just been told she was no longer wanted in her own house, and she saw no weakness there. From below, she heard the faint, muffled sound of Caleb's voice, low and uncertain. Serafina's softer tone followed sharp and quick, like the snap of a whip, confirming that he'd performed as instructed. Sierra didn't move for a moment, Then she crossed the room, opened a hidden drawer in the desk, and pulled out a worn leather folder. Inside were the house papers, the full deed thick with legal jargon, but with her name printed clearly on the top line. Sierra Vance. The words were simple. They meant power. She sat on the upholstered chair, flipped through the pages, and read the date she had made the final payment 10 years ago. Every bill cleared, every document sealed, every corner of this ranch house built with her hands and her choices. There was nothing left to argue about, no shared claim, no forgotten clause. She reached for the old leather-bound notebook she kept on her nightstand, a ledger of her life filled with numbers, reminders, and notes about the ranch's repairs. She turned to a blank page, its cream surface smooth under her fingertips, and pressed the pen down firmly. Sell the house quietly. She looked at those 3 words until they felt real, until they resonated with the cold logic that now governed her. Caleb said he needed space. Serafina said she needed peace. Fine. They would both have it more than they could possibly imagine. Footsteps echoed in the hallway. Caleb paused outside her door. "Mother, are you okay?" Completely, she answered her voice, even without a hint of tremor. He waited for a few seconds, then walked away. She heard him whisper something downstairs. Serafina laughed faintly, a brittle, triumphant sound. Sierra opened the small, cedar-lined closet and pulled out a metal strongbox containing her personal documents, bank statements, insurance forms, receipts for every major purchase in the house, from the new well pump to the living room's grand piano. She laid them on the desk, arranging them in chronological order. Everything in her name. She didn't need to search. She already knew. Her phone buzzed on the desk, startling her. A message from Serafina. "Dinner's ready. We'll eat without you if you're busy." Sierra looked at it, then placed the phone face down. The message wasn't about food. It was about control. A test. She was testing how far Sierra would bend before she broke. Sierra wouldn't bend again. She opened a small silver box in her desk drawer, one she hadn't touched in years. Inside were small, tarnished trinkets that once meant family. Her late husband's pocket watch, a faded photograph of Caleb as a child, grinning, and a folded note in Daniel's familiar hand. "Everything you build, protect it." She closed the box carefully. It wasn't time to feel. It was time to move. From the window, she could see the reflection of the Christmas lights flickering on the snow-dusted branches of the old cedar tree by the driveway. The same lights Caleb had hung 2 nights ago, while Serafina stood below, giving instructions, her voice sharp and proprietary, as if she already owned the place. Sierra picked up her notebook again and drew a clean, decisive line under her last note. "Call Blythe." Blythe would understand. She always did. The phone rang twice before her friend answered her voice, laced with the worry that only true friendship could carry. "Sierra, are you all right? You sound calm." And that's never good. "I'm fine," Blythe Sierra said. "I just need a favor." What kind? Blythe's tone sharpened instantly. Discretion. "Do you still know that real estate agent Clyde Harding who helped your sister sell her acreage last year?" There was a pause on the other end, a breath held. Then Clyde Harding. "Yes, that's the one." Blythe's voice grew cautious. "What's going on, Sierra? I'm selling the house." Sierra's voice remained even unwavering. "This December." Another longer silence. "Sierra, are you sure?" "I'm sure, Blythe. Just tell him to call me tonight." Blythe exhaled slowly, a long, weary sigh. "All right. But whatever you're planning, be careful. Always." Sierra hung up and set the phone aside. Her hands rested flat on the desk for a long moment. The polished wood felt cool, solid, like certainty itself. Downstairs, she could hear faint laughter. Serafina's voice, light and controlled, was telling some story, probably about her. Sierra picked up the deed again, her fingers tracing the raised lettering of her name one last time. It wasn't just ownership, it was proof. Caleb thought she'd stay quiet because she loved him too much to fight back. He forgot that she had taught him everything he knew about strength. She placed the documents back into the folder, sealed it, and slid it into her handbag. Her plan was set. No arguments, no announcements, just action. She turned off the lamp and stood in the dark for a few seconds. The quiet no longer felt heavy. It felt like power. They wanted space, she murmured under her breath. Now they'll get it. And for the first time that night, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touched Sierra's lips. The next morning felt colder, though the heating system hummed steadily. The faint, sweet scent of cinnamon from last night's gingerbread lingered, a ghost of comfort. Sierra poured coffee into her old ceramic mug, its surface worn smooth by years of use, and stared at the empty chair across the kitchen table. Her phone rang, startling her slightly. Blythe's name lit up the screen. Morning Blythe's voice was warm, a welcome contrast to the chill in the room. "I baked gingerbread. You're still coming, right?" Maybe, Sierra replied, stirring her coffee slowly. "You sound off. What happened?" "My son told me he's tired of seeing me. On Christmas." A pause, thick with unspoken outrage. "He said that word for word." "Word for word?" Blythe's tone dropped, hardened. "In your own house, that boy owes his life to your patience." "Patience isn't a life skill," Blythe Sierra said flatly. "It's a delay tactic." Blythe exhaled softly. "Come by anyway. I'll make coffee strong enough to melt walls." "I'm not running, Blythe." "Then what are you doing?" Thinking, Sierra said, her gaze drifting to the frost-laced window pane. "About how to give them the space they want and the silence they won't handle." Blythe's voice steadied, a note of unease creeping in. "You're not planning something. Reckless, are you?" "Reckless is emotion," Sierra corrected. "This is arithmetic." Sierra Blythe murmured, her voice filled with a mixture of apprehension and reluctant admiration. "You scare me when you talk like that. Then you finally understand me." There was a short silence before Blythe said, "Fine. I'll stop by in 20 with the cookies." 20 minutes later, the doorbell chimed, a cheerful sound that felt out of place. Blythe stepped inside her scarf, dusted with melting snow, a brightly wrapped tin held carefully in her arms. The warmth from her coat met the chill of Sierra's kitchen. "Here," Blythe said, placing the tin on the counter, still warm. Sierra opened the lid. The aroma hit first. Ginger clove molasses, a comforting embrace of scent. "Smells like calm," she muttered. Blythe leaned against the counter, her expression watchful. "Calm isn't the word I'd use. You're plotting something." "Observation isn't plotting." Blythe raised an eyebrow, a hint of a smile playing on her lips. "You've got that look again." "What look?" "The someone's going to regret underestimating me look." Sierra didn't answer. She broke a gingerbread cookie in half, the crisp snap echoing in the quiet. "Remember when Caleb was 12, he said cookies fixed everything. Cookies. Because you told him that." "I lied." Blythe's brow furrowed. "You're serious about leaving, aren't you?" "I'm serious about balance. They took comfort for granted. I'll show them cost." Blythe sat down, her movements deliberate. "You have a plan." Clyde Harding, Sierra said, opening her notebook, her finger tracing the name. "Real estate. Confidential sales only." Blythe's eyes widened. "That fast. Fast keeps people honest." "I know him," Blythe said slowly, a thoughtful expression on her face. "He helped my sister sell her prairie condo. Quiet worker. I can call him." "Do that." Blythe pulled out her phone. Sierra listened to the faint murmur of her friend's voice, arranging a meeting. Blythe's words were calm, efficient. When she hung up, she turned toward Sierra. "He'll call you within the hour." "Good. Are you sure you want to do this behind Caleb's back?" Behind Sierra asked, a touch of steel in her voice. "He told me to leave. I'm simply respecting his wish." Blythe rubbed her temple. "You're taking his cruelty and turning it into math. That's dangerous." "No," Sierra corrected, her gaze steady. "It's precise." The phone buzzed. Unknown number. Sierra answered. Mrs. Vance Clyde Harding speaking. Blythe mentioned your situation. Thank you for calling. She said discretion is important. It is. And the house is solely under your name, correct? Yes. Paid in full. No liens, no shared title. He hesitated, a professional pause. Then this will be simple. I can prepare the documents today. Would you prefer an in-person meeting or virtual in-person? Tomorrow morning, but not at this address. Understood. Send the location by text. I will. When the call ended, Blythe let out a slow whistle. You weren't kidding. I don't kid about ownership. Blythe folded her hands. You're colder than usual. I learned from warmth, Sierra replied. It never protected me. Blythe looked around the kitchen, the polished oak table, the empty plates, the perfect, unsettling quiet. So this is it. This is the start. She sighed. You'll hurt him, you know. No, Sierra said softly. He hurt himself when he stopped seeing me as a person. You'll leave him with nothing. I'll leave him with truth. Blythe's eyes softened with understanding. You've changed. No, Sierra whispered. I just stopped apologizing. The sound of keys rattling came from the hallway. Caleb's voice followed hesitant, other Blythe's. He walked in, still wearing his winter coat, his eyes shifting between them, a forced smile on his face. I didn't know you had company. Morning. Morning, Sierra said evenly. Smells good. Gingerbread. Yes, Blythe replied. You want one? Sure. He took a cookie bit into it, his gaze darting between the two women. Seraphina's decorating the tree. You should come help. I have plans. His smile faltered. Plans. Personal ones. He hesitated. You're still upset about what I said. Sierra met his eyes, her gaze clear and unblinking. I'm not upset, Caleb. I'm awake. Blythe looked down at her coffee cup, a small, knowing smirk playing on her lips. Caleb tried to laugh it off. You know, Seraphina didn't mean... Stop explaining her, Sierra interrupted. It doesn't change what you both believe. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. A flicker of irritation quickly masked, crossing his features. I should go. Probably. He left quietly, the door shutting behind him with a soft click. Blythe exhaled. He's clueless. He's comfortable, Sierra replied. Comfort dulls conscience. Blythe rose from her chair, brushing imaginary crumbs from her sleeve. What happens next? I sign. I sell. And I disappear. Blythe looked at her, her eyes searching Sierra's face. You're not scared. Scared of what? Losing a house or proving I never needed it? Blythe smiled faintly. You sound like your old self again. Then it's about time, Sierra said. Blythe headed to the door. I'll call tonight. And... Sierra. Yes, don't lose that calm. It's your sharpest weapon. When Blythe left, the house felt quiet again, but a different quiet. Sierra stood at the counter, the air still filled with the lingering scent of gingerbread and snow. She looked down at the table where Caleb had left a single crumb. She brushed it into her palm and dropped it into the trash. The sound was soft, final, perfect. The next morning started with the low hum of the heater and a crisp line of frost etching the windows. Sierra poured her coffee, checked her notebook, and waited. At precisely 9 o'clock, a sleek silver sedan pulled into the gravel driveway. Silas Croft never ran late. He stepped out tall and impeccably dressed in a dark winter coat, a leather briefcase held firmly in one hand. His expression was sharp cold, like order itself. When he entered, the air in the house subtly shifted, becoming more formal, more serious. Morning, Sierra. Silas, you're on time. I always am. He glanced around the dining room, his gaze lingering on the polished table. I remember this table. You hosted Christmas here 3 years in a row. That was before gratitude became optional. He gave a short, non-committal nod, a faint line forming between his brows, and opened his briefcase. Let's talk property. They sat across from each other. Silas spread the documents with neat, practiced precision. Title tax records, the full deed. Everything still under Sierra's name. I double-checked last night, Sierra said, sliding her own folder closer. No transfers, no co-owners. He flipped through the pages, his sharp eyes scanning the legal text. Clean. You could sell it today and no one could contest it. That's the plan. His eyes lifted, meeting hers. Blythe told me what happened. She tells you too much. She tells me just enough to prepare your defense. I'm not the one who needs defending. Silas studied her for a beat, the corner of his mouth tightening almost imperceptibly. You're serious about selling. I don't bluff with deeds. He leaned back in his chair, a thoughtful expression on his face. Then we move fast. Quiet sale, cash buyer, no public listing. Clyde Harding is handling it, Sierra confirmed. Good choice. He works clean. Silas marked a note in the margin of a document. He paused, watching her. How are you holding up? Fine, really. I've been insulted by my own blood in a house I built from scratch. That removes most illusions. He tapped his pen once against the wood of the table, the sound sharp, final. You know, most people would cry. Most people don't have a plan. A faint, almost imperceptible smile crossed his face, a rare sight. I'll draft the confidentiality agreement today. No digital trail, just signatures. Perfect. He turned a page, reviewing dates, then looked up. You'll also need to declare capital gains. I'll handle that. The less paperwork left open, the better. Handle it all. I trust you. Trust is expensive these days. I can afford it. Sierra replied, her gaze steady. He chuckled softly, a low rumble. Still the same Sierra, always 3 steps ahead. I prefer clean exits to dramatic ones. He looked up, meeting her gaze. And your son, what about him? He'll ask questions once he finds out. Then he'll learn answers have deadlines too. Silas let the words hang in the air, contemplating them. Does Serafina know anything? She suspects control is slipping. That's enough to keep her busy. He closed the folder, the leather making a soft, satisfying sound. You're aware that once you sell, they'll have no claim left, not even residency. That's the idea. He studied her quietly, his expression unreadable. This isn't revenge, is it? It's correction. He nodded once, a brief, sharp movement. Understood. The silence stretched for a few seconds, filled only by the gentle hum of the heater. Then Silas reached for his coat pocket and pulled out a sleek, black, heavy pen. You'll need to sign here and here. Nothing final yet, just authorization to prepare documents. Sierra read the pages carefully, her eyes scanning every line of legalese, then signed. The sound of the pen on paper was steady, clean. When she handed it back, he met her eyes. You just turned a page most people never dare to open. I stopped being most people when they stopped being family. He gathered the papers, slid them into his briefcase, and locked it with a soft click. You'll have a buyer within 48 hours. I already have one in mind. Sierra replied, a faint, almost imperceptible curve to her lips. Silas blinked, a flicker of surprise in his normally impassive eyes. You're faster than I thought. Speed keeps guilt from catching up. He zipped the briefcase, then looked at her for a long second. His expression one of deep assessment. You know what I like about you, Sierra? No. You don't scream. You just execute. Noise doesn't win wars, Silas. Paperwork does. He smiled faintly, a rare, genuine smile. Then let's win one quietly. He reached the door, but paused, his hand on the brass knob. I'll send confirmation tonight. You sure you're okay being alone through this? I've been alone in this house for years, Sierra replied, her voice quiet, reflective. They just filled the space. He gave a small nod. You always turn pain into precision. Don't lose that. I won't. The door clicked shut behind him. Sierra stayed at the table for a while, staring at the signature drying on the page. The ink shimmered under the soft light. Her name holding everything they'd tried to take. The silence was comfortable now. No pity, no noise, just control. A car pulled into the driveway again. Not Silas's. Caleb stepped in through the front door without knocking his usual casual disrespect. His eyes went straight to the remaining papers on the dining table. What's all this? Routine legal work. Sierra answered, her voice even. He frowned. You're updating your will. Not exactly. He walked closer, his gaze suspicious. You didn't tell me Silas was coming. I didn't think I needed your permission. Her words were flat, without inflection, his lips pressed into a thin line. You've been distant lately. Observing helps me think about what boundaries, Sierra replied, her gaze unwavering. You wanted space. I'm building it. He blinked, confused. That's not what I meant. I know exactly what you meant, Caleb. His voice lowered, an attempt at appeasement. Mother, you're not still angry, are you? I don't do anger. I do results. He took a step back, uneasy. You're different. I finally am. He hesitated, then turned toward the stairs. Seraphina's waiting. Seraphina's waiting for me. She wants to talk about Christmas plans. Enjoy them while you can. He stopped mid-step. His hand already on the banister, turning back slowly. His brow furrowed in confusion. What's that supposed to mean? You'll find out soon enough? Sierra's voice was devoid of malice, simply a statement of fact, as cold and clear as the winter air outside. He stared at her for a long moment, a bewildered expression on his face, as if she were speaking a foreign tongue. Then, without another word, he turned and ascended the stairs, his footsteps muffled by the thick runner. Sierra heard his muted voice, then Seraphina's brighter, more animated reply from the landing. They would be in their element now, discussing which ornaments to hang, which dishes to prepare, oblivious to the carefully laid groundwork beneath their feet. When the house went quiet again, Sierra opened her notebook and wrote one line, her pen scratching softly against the page. Stage 1, complete. Then she closed it. The leather cover, a reassuring weight in her hand, calm as ever. The next morning, snow covered the porch steps again, a fresh, pristine blanket. Sierra, despite the chill, wiped the steps clean with a worn bristle brush. Her movements rhythmic, methodical. She enjoyed the bite of the cold, the way it sharpened her senses. At precisely 10 o'clock, Clyde Harding's black sedan pulled up to the ornate wrought-iron gates of the ranch. He stepped out, a tall man in a neat charcoal suit, his clear, intelligent eyes scanning the property briefcase in hand. Mrs. Vance, he greeted, his voice crisp and professional as he approached the porch. I have everything ready. Come in, Clyde, Sierra said, stepping aside, a faint smile touching her lips. The house, freshly cleaned and quiet, waited. He entered, his gaze sweeping over the living room. The dormant Christmas tree in the corner, its silver garland catching the faint light, the perfect order of the furniture. Beautiful place, he commented, his voice low, appreciative. It used to be a home. Sierra replied, her gaze distant, fixed on the tree. Now it's just property. Clyde nodded, once his expression unreadable. Then let's treat it as such. They sat at the dining table, the same table where Caleb had made his pronouncement. Clyde opened a thick folder, its pages rustling softly. I found a buyer, a couple relocating from Chicago. Full cash offer. They want a private closing by Friday. That's in 2 days. Sierra met his gaze, a flicker of satisfaction in her eyes. 2 days. Perfect. Yes, Mom. They're prepared. No questions, no delays. They're keen to settle quickly. Perfect. She leaned forward as he passed her the offer sheet. Sierra read each line carefully. Her gaze, sharp, missing nothing. Steady transfer through my escrow office. Exactly. We'll handle the sale through a temporary holding account to protect your identity. No public listing, no digital footprint. That's what I want. He hesitated, his gaze briefly flicking towards the upper floors. Your son and daughter-in-law live here, Mrs. Vance. They reside here, Sierra corrected, her voice firm. They don't own a single square inch. That much is clear in the deed. His mouth tightened, almost imperceptibly. Understood. He slid the purchase agreement across the table. Sign here to authorize showing access. Sierra picked up her pen, its familiar weight comforting in her hand. No signs outside, No open house. Of course, Mrs. Vance. Only vetted buyers as discussed. They'll arrive discreetly. The pen moved smoothly over the crisp paper, her signature, a bold, decisive flourish. Each stroke felt like reclaiming a piece of herself, like drawing a deep breath of clean, cold air. Clyde glanced up, a hint of admiration in his eyes. You're not nervous. I don't waste energy on second thoughts, Clyde. He smiled faintly, a genuine appreciative curve of his lips. If all sellers were like you, my job would be easier. That's because I'm not selling a memory. I'm closing a chapter. He nodded, acknowledging her words. I'll confirm everything with the buyers by noon. We'll proceed with the private showing this afternoon. Good. Use my secondary email for all correspondence. Already noted. Sierra leaned back in her chair. Once the transfer clears, I want the proceeds sent directly to the new trust Silas prepared. Done. You're remarkably organized, Mrs. Vance. I've had a lifetime to learn paperwork warfare. He laughed quietly, a soft, dry sound. Then we'll get along fine. The front door suddenly opened, interrupting their quiet transaction. Caleb's voice echoed in the entrance hall, boisterous and casual. Mother, you here? Clyde froze, his composure momentarily ruffled. Sierra didn't. In here, Caleb, she called, her voice betraying nothing. Caleb walked into the dining room, his eyes darting between Sierra and Clyde, a frown already forming on his face. Who's this? Clyde Harding Sierra replied evenly. He's helping me with a transaction. Caleb's frown deepened. What kind of transaction? Maintenance. Sierra answered, her voice calm, dismissive. Nothing you need to worry about. He looked at Clyde, then back at his mother, suspicion clouding his eyes. You're selling something. Clyde glanced at Sierra. She gave him a subtle, almost imperceptible nod, a silent instruction to remain silent. Caleb's tone sharpened, a hint of accusation creeping in. Mother, what's going on? Grown-up business, Sierra said, her gaze firm. Finish your coffee before you start interrogating me. His jaw tightened, a flash of familiar petulance in his eyes. Serafina should be here for this. She shouldn't. Sierra countered, her voice unwavering. This concerns me, not her. Clyde checked his watch, seizing the opportune moment. Mrs. Vance, I'll finalize the documents and send the confirmation at noon. I have other appointments. Thank you, Clyde. He packed his folder quickly, his movements swift and efficient, and slipped out through the side door, quiet as a shadow. Caleb turned to Sierra, his voice a low growl. Tell me you're not doing something stupid. I'm doing something permanent. He blinked, taken aback. What does that mean? It means this house won't be a cage anymore. He stared at her, genuinely lost, as if she were speaking in riddles. Mother, you're overreacting. Sierra leaned back in her chair, her voice steady, unyielding. You told me to leave. I'm making sure I can. His mouth opened, then closed again. No words forming. I didn't mean... I know exactly what you meant, Caleb. He took a step closer, a desperate plea in his eyes. We can fix this. No, Caleb. You can decorate the tree. Eat dinner, pretend we're fine. I'm past pretending. He hesitated, a defeated slump to his shoulders. Does Serafina know? Not yet. Sierra replied, a faint, humorless smile touching her lips. But she'll notice soon enough. He exhaled, frustrated, running a hand through his hair. You're making a mistake. I've made plenty, Sierra said, her gaze piercing. This won't be one of them. He rubbed his face, a gesture of profound weariness. You can't just sell the house out of nowhere. I can, and I have. It's under my name. Every payment came from my account. You never even asked where the mortgage papers went. His eyes darkened with a sudden dawning comprehension. You kept everything. I built everything. Sierra corrected, her voice rising slightly, imbued with an unwavering authority. He shook his head, denial etched across his face. This isn't you. You're right, Sierra said, her voice quiet but resonant. It's the version of me that finally stopped being convenient. He stood still for a moment, then turned and left without another word. The front door slammed shut, rattling the glass panes. The sound didn't bother Sierra. She calmly gathered the signed forms and slid them back into the folder. On the top page, the words read, "Seller Sierra Vance, sole owner." The air felt lighter, already cleansed. She called Clyde back. "He's gone," good Clyde replied, his voice efficient. "The buyers accepted your terms. We'll close Friday at 2 p.m. Perfect. One more thing," he added. "Do you want me to notify Silas for immediate trust transfer?" "Yes, Silas handles all releases." "Understood. You'll get an email tonight." "Thank you, Clyde. You handle this better than anyone I've met." He admitted a note of genuine admiration in his voice. "Experience teaches efficiency." Sierra replied and hung up. Snow started again, light but steady, a soft curtain falling across the world. Sierra stood by the window, watching flakes hit the glass. Inside the house, everything looked calm, too calm. The chairs aligned the framed photos straight, the smell of gingerbread fading. But beneath the quiet, something fundamental had shifted. For the first time in years, the house felt like hers again, truly and completely. By Friday, the light snow had turned to a deeper, soft blanket, muting the world in white. The ranch house gleamed quiet and meticulously staged, as if it already belonged to someone else. The sharp, clean scent of lemon polish now covered everything that once smelled of home. At 10 o'clock that morning, Clyde Harding's car pulled to the curb. He stepped out, followed by two strangers, a young couple holding hands. Both dressed neatly, polite smiles on their faces barely concealing their nerves. Mrs. Vance Clyde greeted his professionalism a familiar comfort. "These are Mr. and Mrs. Carter. They're the buyers we discussed." Sierra nodded, once her expression cool but welcoming. "Welcome," the woman. Mrs. Carter smiled softly, her eyes wide with appreciation. "Your home is beautiful, Mrs. Vance." "It was Sierra," replied, her voice even. "Now it's ready for someone new." Clyde opened his folder. "They've seen the disclosures, all clean. No pending taxes, no liens." "Perfect," Sierra said. "Let's go through it." Mr. Carter looked around, his gaze taking in the high ceilings, the handcrafted fireplace. "You've kept it immaculate." "I don't believe in chaos." Sierra replied, a faint, dry humor in her tone. He laughed politely. "We can tell." They walked through the living room. The Christmas tree still stood in the corner, its lights dimmed ornaments reflecting the grey winter sky. Mrs. Carter traced her fingers along the polished oak banister of the grand staircase, her expression thoughtful. "This place feels calm." "That's the furniture," Sierra said, her voice devoid of sentiment. "Not the history." Clyde caught her eye. "Shall we proceed to the office, Mrs. Vance?" They sat at the dining table again. Her table. For now. Papers spread between them. Pens aligned the quiet hum of finality, filling the room. Clyde began. "Full payment confirmed by wire transfer. Deed transfer ready for signature." Sierra took the pen, its familiar weight, a symbol of her resolve. "Let's finish this." The buyers exchanged a hesitant look. Mr. Carter spoke, his voice slightly nervous. "So soon?" "Quick deals, keep people honest," Sierra said, signing the first page with a flourish. Clyde nodded approvingly. "You're the most efficient client I've had in months, Mrs. Vance." "Efficiency," Sierra said, signing the next page, "is underrated." He smiled faintly. "We'll handle closing with the title office at 2 p.m. Once recorded funds go straight to your trust." "Good." The buyers signed. Next, their hands trembling slightly as they pressed the pen to paper. Mr. Carter looked up at Sierra, his brow furrowed with a hint of uncertainty. "You're sure about this, Mrs. Vance?" "I was sure the moment my son told me he was tired of seeing me." Clyde's pen froze mid-line. The buyers glanced at each other awkwardly. Sierra didn't flinch, her gaze steady, unwavering. People change, so do addresses. So do... Mr. Carter cleared his throat, an embarrassed flush rising to his cheeks. "Well, thank you for selling to us. Take care of the house." Sierra said, her voice quiet. It's seen too much obedience. They both smiled politely, a little confused, not quite understanding the depth of her words. They handed the papers back to Clyde. He reviewed them quickly. All good. We'll finalize it. The front door opened suddenly, startling everyone. Serafina's voice, sharp and high, rang out from the entrance hall. Sierra. Clyde stiffened, a flash of alarm in his eyes. Sierra didn't turn. Kitchen, she called, her voice calm, measured. Serafina's heels clicked fast against the polished floorboards as she hurried into the dining room. Her eyes, wide and accusing, swept over the table. The signed documents, the presence of the buyers. What's going on here? Clyde straightened, his voice composed. We're finalizing a property sale, ma'am. Her eyes widened further, disbelief, warring with dawning horror. A sale. You're selling the house. That's correct? Serafina Sierra said, her voice calm, level, without a hint of triumph. You can't just... This house belongs to our family, she shrieked, her carefully constructed composure cracking. It belongs to whoever's name is on the deed. Sierra replied, her gaze unwavering. Serafina's tone sharpened, venomous. Caleb doesn't know, does he? He'll know at 4 p.m. Sierra said, meeting her eyes, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touching her lips. Serafina stepped closer, her face contorted with rage. You're out of your mind. No, Sierra said quietly. I'm out of patience. Clyde cleared his throat, his gaze deferential. Mrs. Vance, shall I escort the buyers out? Yes, Clyde. We're done here. Serafina spun towards the bewildered couple, her voice rising to a frantic pitch. You can't buy this. There's been a mistake. Clyde interrupted smoothly, his voice firm but polite. The documents are legal and verified, ma'am. You're not on the title. Her face flushed crimson, a violent blotch of colour. You have no right. I have every right, Sierra cut in, her voice clear and strong, and every signature to prove it. The buyers, clearly uncomfortable, excused themselves quickly, murmuring hurried goodbyes, as Clyde followed them to the door, closing it softly behind him. When the house went silent again, the air thick with tension, Serafina's voice dropped low, sharp as shattered glass. You're destroying your son's life. No, Sierra said, her gaze steady, unblinking. I'm ending his vacation. You can't evict your own child. I can when he stops being one. Her lip trembled, not from sadness, but from barely suppressed rage. Caleb trusted you. He trusted my wallet. Serafina stared at her, disbelief turning into raw contempt. He'll never forgive you for this. I'm not applying for forgiveness. She laughed bitterly, a harsh, humorless sound. You'll regret this, Sierra. I don't regret logic. Clyde returned, closing the door behind him. His presence, a calm, authoritative anchor. Everything's finalized, Mrs. Vance. The title office confirmed 2 o'clock for closing. Serafina spun toward him, her voice cracking with desperation. You can't let this happen. He remained perfectly calm. It already has, Mrs. Bennett. The legal paperwork is complete. Caleb will fight this. Clyde smiled politely, a thin professional curve of his lips. Then he'll lose politely. Serafina's eyes filled with fury, her face contorted. You're cruel. Sierra leaned forward slightly, her voice a quiet, devastating counterpoint. Cruelty would have been leaving without warning. I'm giving notice. Serafina stared at her speechless, her mouth agape. Clyde gathered his papers, arranging them with meticulous care. We'll head to the title office in an hour, Mrs. Vance. Thank you, Clyde. As soon as he left, Serafina muttered under her breath, something venomous. Sierra almost didn't catch. You'll regret this, Nora. Sierra looked her dead in the eye, her voice cutting through the silence. No, Serafina, you will. Serafina stormed out, slamming the front door so hard the festive Christmas wreath fell to the floor, scattering pine needles and glitter. Sierra picked it up, set it aside with a soft sigh, and exhaled slowly. The house was still again, calm, stripped, waiting. She checked her watch. 1 hour until freedom. She poured herself another cup of coffee, black, no sugar, and whispered to the quiet, empty room. They wanted space. I gave them emptiness. By Monday, the house was truly quiet again. A deep, abiding stillness. The sale papers, officially stamped and recorded, were locked in a folder on Sierra's desk. She was finishing her morning coffee, a new routine in a newly quiet house, when her phone buzzed. Silas Croft lit up the screen. Morning Sierra answered, her voice steady. His tone was clipped formal. Sierra. We have a problem. I don't do problems, Silas. Just facts. You're going to like this one, he replied. A hint of something grimly satisfied in his voice. Your son and daughter-in-law tried to take out a $200,000 loan using your name. Sierra's grip on the ceramic mug tightened, the warmth of the coffee seeping into her palm. They forged my signature. Exactly. The bank flagged it. I stopped it before it processed. Send me the file. I already did, he said. They even attached a fake authorization letter, copied your handwriting from the previous title deed. Sierra's gaze drifted toward the staircase. The lights upstairs were off, the silence profound. You're sure? As sure as a notary with a conscience, he answered. Block every attempt from now on. Freeze any pending access to the estate account. Already done. Good. A long pause. Do you want me to press charges? Not yet, Sierra replied. I'd rather let them sweat under silence. Understood. Silas ended the call. Sierra stared at the sleek silver pen on her table, the very one they'd tried so clumsily to imitate. Footsteps echoed faintly from the hallway. Caleb appeared half awake, trying to project an air of calm. Morning, Mother. Morning, Caleb. Sierra replied, her voice neutral. He rubbed the back of his neck, a nervous habit. You look serious. Serious suits me. He frowned, sensing the shift in her demeanor. Is something wrong? Depends on your definition. He hesitated, his eyes flicking toward the papers on her desk. Serafina's been worried. She said you were talking to lawyers again. Always a good habit. What's going on? His voice was edged with a forced casualness. Forgery, Sierra replied, her gaze unwavering. An old-fashioned one, signed with my name. His face paled, the color draining from his cheeks. What? I assume you can guess who tried it. He froze, his eyes wide. You think I think... No, Sierra cut in, her voice flat. I know. His voice cracked, a desperate plea. That's ridiculous. The bank didn't think so. Neither did Silas. He took a step closer, agitated. Mother, you don't understand. Stop using we to hide behind her, Sierra. Cut in her voice like a surgeon's scalpel. You signed it twice. He shook his head fast, frantic. Serafina said it was temporary, just until you learned how to commit a felony. He opened his mouth, then shut it again. No words escaping. Sierra leaned back in her chair, observing him with a cool, detached gaze. I built this house from a salary check. I paid every bill on time, and you used my name like a spare key to your own convenience. I was desperate. He whispered, his voice barely audible. You were entitled. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. You're overreacting. Forgery is a crime, Caleb, not a misunderstanding. Serafina's voice came from behind him, sharp and clear. You don't need to threaten us, Sierra. She stepped into the room, hair perfectly coiffed. Her expression a practiced mask of defiant innocence. You look calm for someone who almost committed bank fraud. Sierra noted, her voice dry. Serafina's smile stayed frozen brittle. This is a family matter. No need to exaggerate. Sierra stood, her posture tall and unyielding. You forged my name. It was just paperwork. Serafina snapped, her mask slipping. Paperwork happens to be my battlefield. Caleb tried to intervene, a desperate gesture. Mother, we just needed time. The holidays. You had years, Sierra interrupted. Time was never the issue. Integrity was. Serafina crossed her arms, a defiant tilt to her chin. We were going to pay it back. With what morals? She glared, her eyes narrowing. You're not as innocent as you pretend, Sierra. You manipulate everyone. I don't manipulate. I document. You can't throw us out, she warned, her voice laced with malice. I don't need to. The law already will. A sharp knock interrupted them. The front door opened, and Silas Croft stepped in, a new folder under his arm. Morning, he said briskly, his gaze sweeping over the scene. Serafina froze, her eyes wide with alarm. You again? Always a pleasure, Mrs. Bennet. Silas replied dryly, not missing a beat. Mrs. Vance, the forgery file as requested. He placed the folder on the dining table, opening it, so both Caleb and Serafina could see the damning evidence. This is the original loan application, and this he flipped. The page is your copy of her signature. Serafina's face drained of colour. Spot the difference. Sierra murmured, her voice soft, chilling. Silas continued, his voice steady, authoritative. The loan officer confirmed this was filed last Thursday. IP address traces back to this house. Caleb took a step back, shaking his head. That's not proof. It's enough for a warrant, Mr. Bennet. Silas replied, his gaze unwavering. Serafina's voice cracked, desperation creeping in. You can't prove intent. Silas looked at her, his expression cold. Intent is assumed when someone signs another person's name under penalty of perjury, ma'am. Her mask completely slipped, revealing raw fear. You wouldn't dare press charges. Sierra folded her arms, her gaze direct, challenging. Try me. Silas closed the folder with a definitive snap. I've already filed an incident report. We can pursue civil action if Mrs. Vance chooses. Not yet, Sierra said. Fear is sometimes a better teacher than punishment. Serafina's jaw clenched, her eyes blazing with hatred. You're heartless. No, Sierra replied. I'm thorough. Caleb looked at the floor, his shoulders slumped. Mother, I didn't mean for this. Intent doesn't erase ink, Caleb. He swallowed hard. I'll fix it. You can start by finding somewhere else to stay. Serafina gasped, a dramatic, outraged sound. You're kicking us out. I'm respecting the closing date, Sierra corrected. Silas gathered the documents. Mrs. Vance, once the sale finalizes this afternoon, they'll no longer have legal access to the property. Serafina turned toward him, her voice venomous. This isn't over. It is on paper, ma'am, he replied calmly. She glared at Sierra, her eyes filled with fury. You'll regret humiliating your own family. Sierra met her stare without blinking. I regret raising someone who thought family meant ownership. Silas's tone softened slightly, a hint of concern in his eyes. Everything's in order, Sierra. Just sign the affidavit here, confirming the attempted fraud. Sierra signed it without hesitation. Done. He nodded. This locks their access permanently. Serafina stepped forward, her voice trembling with impotent rage. You think you've won. I don't compete, Sierra replied. I conclude. Serafina turned to Caleb. Say something. But he stayed silent, his shoulders sagging, defeated. Silas checked his watch. I'll see you at 2 for the final transfer, Sierra. Thank you, Silas. He left quietly, his professionalism cutting through the chaos like clean air. Serafina stared at Sierra one last time, her eyes burning with hatred. You'll be alone, Sierra. That's your punishment. Peace is never punishment. Sierra answered, her voice quiet, serene. Serafina stormed out, dragging a bewildered Caleb behind her. The front door slammed shut, echoing through the empty house. The silence that followed felt like victory, steady, not loud. Sierra looked down at the folder still open on the table. The forged signature stared back at her, shaky and unconvincing. She reached for her pen, the real one, and wrote a single line underneath it. They forged my name, but I still hold the pen. Then she closed the folder, locked it away in her desk drawer, and watched the snow start again outside the window. By the next morning, Sierra had almost finished packing. The scent of stripped wood and cardboard filled the air. The doorbell rang. It wasn't the soft, familiar chime of a neighbor or a delivery. It was firm, rhythmic, official. Through the glass panel of the front door, she saw 2 uniformed officers, one male, one female. Their posture, ramrod straight and impersonal, said everything. Sierra opened the door. "Good morning, officers." The male officer stepped forward, polite, but direct. "Mrs. Sierra Vance." "Yes." He lifted a folder, its contents shielded from view. "We have a warrant to conduct a property check. There's a complaint filed by Mr. Caleb Vance and Mrs. Serafina Vance." Sierra didn't even blink. Her face remained impassive. "A complaint for what?" "They claim you sold this property without their consent, using assets belonging to the family." "Interesting," Sierra replied, a faint, dry amusement in her tone. "Come in, officers." The female officer hesitated, her gaze assessing. "Are you aware of the sale currently under review, ma'am?" "Completely aware," Sierra said, calmly stepping aside. "The closing was finalized yesterday at 3:14 p.m. The deed's already recorded." The male officer exchanged a quick, knowing glance with his partner. "Then you won't mind if we take a look, please?" Sierra said, gesturing them inside. "Just don't trip over the truth. It's sharp." They entered, their eyes scanning the living room. The space was nearly bare, just a few packed boxes and the lingering scent of coffee. Serafina's voice came from the hallway like venom wrapped in silk. "You see, she's hiding everything." She appeared behind the officers, her face flushed with indignant fury. Caleb trailing behind her, looking worn and hollow, his eyes dull. The male officer turned, his tone firm. "Ma'am, please remain calm." Serafina gestured dramatically toward Sierra. "She stole our home." Sierra crossed her arms, her stance unwavering. "Correction, Serafina, I sold my home." Caleb's voice cracked, a fragile sound. "You didn't even warn us, mother." "I did," Sierra replied, her gaze piercing. "Repeatedly. You mistook warnings for weakness." The male officer cleared his throat. "Let's keep this civil. Mrs. Vance, can you provide proof of ownership?" Sierra pointed toward the folder on the dining table where it lay conspicuously. In there, certified copy of the title notarized and signed by the buyer's attorney. The female officer opened it, flipping through the pages with a practiced ease. Her brow furrowed slightly as she read. "Everything seems in order here." Serafina scoffed, her voice dripping with derision. "She forged everything." Sierra tilted her head, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touching her lips. "Would you like to explain why your own forgery was reported to the police 2 days ago?" "Serafina." The male officer turned toward Serafina, his expression hardening. "Is that true, ma'am?" Serafina stammered, her face paling. That was unfounded, but conveniently timed, wasn't it?" Sierra finished for her, her voice cutting through Serafina's bluster. The male officer checked his notes, his expression tightening. "We also received a duplicate signature complaint from the bank this week. It's listed under your name, Mrs. Serafina Vance." Serafina froze, her eyes wide with unmasked panic. "That's absurd." Caleb's face drained of all color. "Serafina," she spun toward him, a flash of pure venom in her eyes. "Don't start." The officers exchanged a look, a silent communication passing between them. The female officer closed the folder. Gently, her movements deliberate. "Mrs. Vance," she said to Sierra, her voice respectful. "Your documentation is complete. We have no reason to continue this inspection." "I figured," Sierra replied, a faint, almost imperceptible nod of her head. The male officer added, his tone clipped and official. "We'll file this as a false report. If you wish, you can press charges for harassment. I prefer peace over paperwork." Sierra said, her gaze steady. Serafina's voice rose shrill and desperate. "You can't just walk away from this." The officer faced her, his expression grim. "Ma'am, you made a false allegation against a verified property owner. That's a criminal offense." Her lips trembled, not from sadness, but from impotent rage. "She's manipulating everyone, ma'am," the female officer said quietly, her voice firm. "You need to stop." The silence stretched thick and heavy. Then the sharp click of shoes echoed from the side door. Silas Croft entered, briefcase in hand, his presence a sudden professional counterpoint to the unraveling drama. Officers he greeted smoothly, his gaze sweeping over the scene. Perfect timing. I brought certified copies of the sale confirmation tax clearance and the fraud report we filed against these two individuals. Serafina's eyes widened, her face a mask of horror. You're lying. Silas's tone didn't waver, cool and implacable. The county recorder doesn't lie, Mrs. Vance. The title now belongs to the new owner. You have no standing here. Caleb tried to speak, his voice shaking, a desperate plea in his eyes. Mother, please, don't call me that. Sierra interrupted, her voice calm as glass, devoid of any emotion. You've already used that word for leverage once too often. Serafina turned toward the officers, desperation creeping into her tone. She's turning everyone against us. The male officer exhaled slowly, a sign of his growing impatience. Ma'am, enough. We're done here. They began writing in their report books. Silas handed them a sealed envelope. Official notice that all legal rights have been transferred. Please include this in your file. The female officer nodded, accepting the envelope. We will. Serafina snapped, her voice breaking. This isn't fair. Sierra met her eyes, her gaze unflinching. Fair doesn't exist in theft, Serafina. Caleb whispered, his voice barely audible. You're punishing us. Sierra looked straight at him, her gaze clear and unwavering. I'm educating you. The female officer closed her notebook. We'll leave now. Mrs. Vance, thank you for your cooperation. Anytime, Officer Sierra replied. They walked toward the door, their departure leaving a void in the room. Serafina stood motionless, jaw clenched, eyes wild with fury. Silas adjusted his tie, a gesture of quiet triumph. Well, that's settled. Sierra nodded, almost. He paused, his eyebrow raising slightly. Almost, I'd like to proceed with the fraud case after all. Sierra said, her voice quiet but firm. Silas gave a slow, knowing smile. Understood. I'll file it today. Serafina spun around, her voice a desperate shriek. You can't do that, Sierra replied. And I will. Caleb stepped forward, his voice breaking, tears welling in his eyes. Mother, please stop. We made mistakes, don't ruin our lives. Sierra held his gaze, her eyes clear, devoid of the pity he sought. You ruined your own. He looked away, ashamed, defeated. Serafina muttered something under her breath. Something venomous. But Sierra didn't care enough to catch it. Silas packed his documents, his movements swift and efficient. The law is clear, Sierra. They'll lose any appeal attempt within days. That's not what I'm after, Sierra said quietly, her gaze fixed on her son's slumped shoulders. Silas frowned, a question in his eyes. Then what are you after? Closure. Serafina let out a short, bitter laugh, a ragged sound. You'll end up alone, Sierra. Sierra met her eyes one last time, a faint, unreadable smile on her lips. Alone and free. Beats surrounded and trapped. For the first time, Serafina had no comeback, only a gaping silence. Silas gestured towards the officers who were now exiting the house. They'll file the report by noon. After that, you're untouchable. Good, Sierra replied, turning toward the window. Outside, snow was falling again, soft, silent, and merciless, already beginning to erase the tracks of those who had come and gone. Serafina's voice trembled, a pathetic whimper. Where will we go? That Sierra said evenly, without a hint of satisfaction or regret, was a question you should have asked before betraying me. Serafina looked around the empty room, at the bare walls, the echo of what used to be comfort, now stripped bare. You'll regret this. She whispered, the words barely audible. I don't regret ending mistakes. Silas handed Sierra a final folder. Everything's secure now. The buyer will take possession tomorrow morning. Sierra nodded once, a definitive gesture. Then this chapter is finished. As the door closed behind them, the silence returned, clean, heavy, and final. Sierra poured another cup of coffee. Black, no sugar, her hands steady as ever. Outside, the new snow began to cover every footprint, leading away from her door. It was past midnight when Sierra heard it. The faint metallic clink at the back door. not the sound of wind, nor the rustle of a nocturnal animal. This was intentional. She stayed perfectly still in the dark, listening, her senses acutely aware. Another click, then a low whisper, thin and sharp. "Caleb, hurry up." Serafina's voice. Sierra exhaled slowly, a measured breath that disturbed no dust motes. She turned off the small lamp on her nightstand and stepped silently into the hallway. The security monitor, a discreet screen embedded in the wall, glowed faintly. Two figures moved in the snow outside, one fumbling with the back door lock. She pressed record. Another whisper, more urgent. "The papers must be here somewhere." She hides everything. The door gave a soft creak. They slipped inside, careful as thieves, because they were. Sierra waited motionless until their shadows crossed the living room, their forms momentarily illuminated by the distant streetlights. Then, with a decisive flick of her wrist, the main overhead light snapped on, flooding the room with a harsh, uncompromising brilliance. Looking for something, Sierra's voice, calm and even, cut through the startled silence. Serafina froze mid-step, her body rigid. Caleb spun around, his face pale, his eyes wide with shock. "Sierra. I mean, Mother. We thought you were asleep." "I don't sleep through felonies," Sierra replied evenly. Her arms folded across her chest, her posture one of unwavering control. Serafina, regaining a sliver of her usual bravado, attempted a strained smile. "We just came to get what's ours. Yours." Sierra's voice was laced with a chilling disbelief. "Remind me which part of my sold property belongs to you." Caleb stammered his words, tripping over themselves. "You left files behind important papers. Those files are locked." Sierra stated, her gaze piercing. "Like the truth you've been avoiding." Serafina's tone sharpened, edged with a desperate edge. "We know you still keep a copy of the sale contract here. If we get it, we can prove you cheated us." Cheated. Sierra took a slow, deliberate step closer, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You forged my name, filed false police reports, and broke into a private residence you no longer own. If that's not irony, Serafina, I don't know what is." Serafina's eyes darted toward the desk, a flicker of desperate calculation. Caleb grabbed the folder. He didn't move, frozen in fear and indecision. "Caleb, do it!" She hissed, her voice low and furious. Sierra pressed a button on her phone. A quiet beep sounded from the small, almost invisible camera mounted in the corner of the ceiling. "Smile," she said, a faint, humorless curve to her lips. "You're on live feed." Serafina froze, her eyes wide with fresh horror. "You wouldn't. I already did. The footage is uploading to Silas's cloud as we speak." Caleb's shoulders slumped, utterly defeated. "We just needed a chance to explain, Mother." "Breaking in isn't an explanation," Sierra said, her voice devoid of sympathy. "It's evidence." Serafina's voice rose, a raw, ragged sound. "You set us up." "No," Sierra corrected. "You volunteered." The tension thickened in the room, so heavy it was almost visible. Only the steady ticking of the antique grandfather clock in the hall dared to speak. Then Caleb whispered, his voice trembling. "We're desperate, Mother. The police froze our accounts. Serafina can't pay the rent." Sierra looked at him, calm but not cruel. "Consequences aren't cruelty, Caleb. They're math." Serafina's eyes flashed with renewed fury. "You've always looked down on us." "No," Sierra said, her voice quiet, reflective. "I just finally looked clearly." She clenched her fists, her body vibrating with impotent rage. "You think this is over? I'll destroy every deal you've made. You already tried that with forged documents. Didn't work." Serafina glanced toward the window, her mind clearly calculating escape routes. The motion light outside caught her reflection for a moment, drawn, panicked, small. Sierra walked past her to the kitchen drawer, her movements unhurried, deliberate. She took out a small sealed envelope and placed it on the counter. "Here's your share." Serafina's eyes widened, a flicker of confusion in their depths. What, inside, is this proof you left behind? The fake power of attorney, the false loan papers, and the email you sent to the bank. I suggest you take it before the detective does. Caleb looked stunned, his face pale. You kept those. I keep everything, Sierra answered. Evidence is the one thing people can't argue with. Serafina snatched the envelope, her hand shaking. You're bluffing. Open it. She did, her face draining of colour as she scanned the damning contents. You wouldn't hand this to the police. I already did. That's a copy, Caleb whispered, a desperate plea. Mother, please, Caleb, Sierra said quietly, her voice laced with a profound disappointment. When you forged my signature, you chose your side. Tonight you crossed the line completely. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of despair. We just wanted to fix it. You fix things by owning them, Caleb, not by breaking in. A sudden firm knock rattled the front door. 3 distinct authoritative hits. Serafina jumped, a small frightened gasp escaping her lips. Who's that? Silas, Sierra replied, her voice calm, a hint of satisfaction in its depths. He has impeccable timing. When Sierra opened the door, Silas stood there in his dark coat, holding his phone. Behind him, a patrol car idled quietly by the curb, its blue and red lights flashing softly in the falling snow, painting the white landscape in stark, pulsing colours. Good evening, Silas, said his voice smooth, professional. Detective Grant's waiting outside. Serafina backed up her face, a mask of fear. You called the police. I didn't need to. Sierra answered, her gaze steady. The security system did. Silas stepped inside his eyes, calm, assessing the scene. I suggest you both stop talking. Anything else will be used in court. Caleb swallowed hard, his throat working. Court. Yes, Silas said flatly. This constitutes unlawful entry and attempted tampering with legal evidence. Serafina glared at him, a desperate, cornered animal look in her eyes. You think she's a saint? She's manipulating everyone? Silas met her glare, his voice unwavering. No, Mrs. Vance. She's protecting herself. The law favours the prepared. The female officer from before entered behind him, her notebook and pen ready. We'll take it from here, Mr. Croft. Serafina's voice cracked, her bravado dissolving into raw fear. This is harassment. No, ma'am, the officer replied, her voice firm. This is accountability. Caleb covered his face with his hands, a broken sound escaping him. I didn't mean, you never do. Caleb, Sierra interrupted, her voice quiet but devastating. That's why you keep losing. The officer gestured toward the door. You'll both need to come with us for questioning. Serafina turned to Sierra, her voice trembling, stripped bare of all pretense. You're destroying us. No, Sierra said quietly, her gaze unflinching. You did that the night you decided my signature was yours. Serafina tried to speak, but no words came out, only a choked sob. Silas waited until they were escorted outside, then closed the door gently, the click echoing in the sudden quiet. You okay? He asked, his voice laced with concern. I'm consistent, Sierra replied, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touching her lips. He smiled faintly in return. Detective Grant will handle the rest. You won't need to testify unless you want to. I will, Sierra said, her gaze steady. Some lessons deserve witnesses. They stood there in silence for a moment, the only sound the distant wail of a siren growing fainter. Through the window, the patrol car's lights pulsed red and blue across the fresh snow, a silent tableau of justice. Silas glanced at the monitor, still recording. Perfect footage. You're meticulous. That's how I survived. Sierra answered, her voice quiet. He nodded. Then you'll sleep well tonight. I'll try. After Silas left, the house was still again a profound, almost sacred quiet. Sierra walked to the back door and locked it slowly, deliberately. The metallic click echoed through the empty rooms like a full stop, a definitive end to a long, arduous sentence. On the counter, a half-finished cup of coffee had gone cold. She poured it down the drain, wiped the counter clean with a damp cloth, and whispered to herself, "They broke in, for proof." All they found was truth. By noon the next day, the sky was a pale, unbroken grey, the kind that makes time feel frozen, suspended. Sierra's phone vibrated with a message from Silas. Court filing accepted, meeting at 2 p.m. At exactly 2 o'clock, Sierra walked into his downtown office. The familiar smell of paper-rich leather and polished wood greeted her a scent of serious business. Silas looked up from a stack of folders on his expansive desk, his eyes sharp. "You're punctual as always, Sierra. I don't waste time on people who already wasted mine." He gestured toward the plush leather seat across from him. "Everything's moving fast. Detective Grant's report on last night's break-in went through. Both of them are facing charges for unlawful entry and attempted evidence tampering." Good Sierra replied, her voice devoid of triumph, only a quiet satisfaction. "But I want a civil motion too." He slid a new file across the table, already prepared. "Claiming damages, emotional distress, and fraud. It's airtight. You'll have full control of the settlement." Sierra flipped through the pages, her eyes scanning the legal jargon. "No mercy clauses. None." He confirmed, his gaze unwavering. "If they try to appeal, the forged documents will bury them." "Perfect." Silas leaned back in his chair, studying her. "You're remarkably calm for someone whose son is about to face court. Calm is what happens when you stop confusing love with permission." He smiled faintly, a genuine curve of his lips. "That's one to remember." Before he could continue, the door opened. Detective Grant stepped in, his hat under his arm. "Afternoon, Mrs. Vance." Detective Grant Sierra acknowledged with a nod. "Thought you should hear it from me. Your daughter-in-law spent the night in holding. Your son posted bail this morning." I expected that Sierra answered, her voice flat. "He's always quick to pay for mistakes with borrowed money." Grant nodded. "She's been trying to claim you forced her into signing those loan documents. We found the original emails. She sent them from her own address." "Thank you for confirming," Detective Sierra said. "Truth always leaves fingerprints." Silas turned toward the detective. "Do we have a hearing date, Detective?" "Wednesday morning. The judge wanted it expedited." "Excellent," Silas replied. "That'll finalize everything before the sale transfer completes." Grant gave a small, wry grin. "You're both frighteningly efficient." "I'm old Sierra," said, a hint of dry humor in her voice. "Not slow." After the detective left, Silas passed her another envelope. "One last thing, Sierra. The buyer requested a public confirmation of ownership to prevent future disputes. I drafted a short statement." Sierra took the paper and read it aloud, her voice steady and clear. "The property formerly located at 412 Maple Drive has been legally sold and transferred. Any further claims are fraudulent and will be pursued to the full extent of the law." "Perfect," Sierra said, signing at the bottom. "Send it to the paper, Silas." He chuckled softly, a low rumble in his chest. "You really want it public? Let everyone see what happens when greed meets documentation." Silas nodded, admiration shining in his eyes. "You remind me of my first client. Quiet but lethal. I just prefer clean endings." Sierra said, her gaze firm. Just then, her phone buzzed again. Unknown number. She put it on speaker. "Mrs. Vance," a strained, familiar voice said. "This is Caleb." Sierra didn't reply, letting the silence hang heavy. He continued, his voice cracking. "Seraphina's losing it. She says you ruined our lives." "I didn't ruin anything." Caleb, Sierra answered, her voice calm and unwavering. "I corrected it." "Please," he pleaded, his voice breaking desperate. "If you drop the case, we'll leave town. We'll sign anything." "You already signed too much." Sierra replied, her voice final. "Goodbye, Caleb." She ended the call. Silas exhaled slowly, a long, drawn-out sound. "That was harsh, Sierra." "No," Sierra said, her gaze steady, unblinking. "That was final." They drove to the courthouse in silence. Snow had begun to fall again, thin, precise flakes like cut glass against the windshield. Inside, the air smelled of stale coffee and bureaucracy, a stark contrast to the clean, crisp winter air outside. Elaine was already there, sitting with her lawyer, a nervous, defeated figure. She looked smaller than usual, her confidence stripped away, her perfectly coiffed hair now a little dishevelled. Caleb sat beside her, his hands clasped tight between his knees, his shoulders slumped. When the judge entered, everyone stood. The hearing moved quickly, too quickly for them to find their footing. Silas spoke clearly, presenting the chain of evidence, the forged documents, the bank statements, the security footage from the break-in. Each exhibit hit like a hammer blow, indisputable and damning. Serafina's lawyer tried to object, but the judge silenced him with a sharp gesture. Everything presented here is verified. Serafina's voice cracked, a desperate wail. She's my mother-in-law. She's doing this to destroy us. The judge looked at Sierra, his expression unreadable. Mrs. Vance, do you wish to respond? Sierra rose slowly, her posture straight, unyielding. No, Your Honor. I'm not here to destroy. I'm here to document. The room fell silent, the weight of her words settling over them. The judge nodded, a small, decisive gesture. Well documented indeed. After the final ruling was delivered, a crisp, efficient pronouncement in Silas's favor, he leaned over and whispered, "We won, Sierra." Sierra whispered back, her gaze fixed on the broken figures of Caleb and Serafina no Silas. "We finished." Serafina collapsed into her chair, tears mixing with anger, her face blotchy and contorted. Caleb didn't move, his eyes fixed on some distant point, his face ashen. For the first time, he looked older than Sierra, burdened by the weight of his own choices. Outside the courtroom, the biting wind whipped around them. Silas handed Sierra the stamped copy of the court order. "They're barred from contesting your sale or accessing your accounts. Permanently." Good Sierra said, a quiet finality in her voice. "Let them finally experience quiet." He smiled slightly, a rare warmth in his eyes. "You know, most people would celebrate. I don't celebrate justice, Silas. I maintain it." As they stepped into the cold afternoon, the courthouse bell chimed 3 times. A sharp, clear, honest sound, echoing across the snow-covered square. Silas turned to Sierra. "What's next?" "Closure," Sierra replied, "and moving forward." The next morning, the sun broke through the grey sky, bright and unforgiving, casting sharp, blinding light on the fresh snow. The ranch house was empty now, a hollow shell. The echoes of the past, Caleb's boyish laughter, Serafina's sharp heels on the floorboards, the bitter arguments, were gone, erased as completely as the snow had covered the tracks. Only the walls remained, and they no longer belonged to Sierra. Blythe stood by the door, holding 2 steaming cups of coffee. She didn't ask if Sierra was sad. She knew better. "The truck is gone," she said softly, her breath clouding in the cold air. "Are you ready?" Sierra stood by the kitchen counter one last time, her gaze sweeping over the polished surface. The small silver box, the one containing Daniel's letter, sat there gleaming in the direct sunlight. Her phone buzzed on the table, a final message from Caleb. "Mother, please just call us." She looked at it for a second, no anger, no hesitation. She blocked the number. Then, with a deliberate hand, she opened the silver box. Inside lay Daniel's old letter, its paper fragile with age, and the crisp official court ruling she had won yesterday. The past and the present, and are both safe, both understood. "I kept my promise, Daniel," she whispered, her voice barely audible, a faint, almost private sound. "I didn't let them take what we built. I let it go on my own terms." She snapped the lid shut, a sharp final click that sounded like freedom itself. "I'm ready, Blythe Sierra," said her voice clear and strong. They walked out into the crisp winter air. The sold sign on the lawn was covered in fresh snow, its red lettering stark against the white. Sierra handed the keys to the real estate agent waiting by the gate. her gaze not lingering, not looking back at the window where she used to wait for her son to come home. She got into her car, the engine humming to life, warm and steady. Blythe leaned in through the open window, her face softened by a gentle smile. "Where to?" Forward, Sierra replied, her eyes bright, fixed on the horizon. "Somewhere quiet, somewhere vast." She shifted gears and pulled away. The road ahead curved along the frozen lake, shimmering like 1,000 scattered diamonds under the morning sun. She remembered what she told Caleb that night, the night her world had shattered and then reformed into something stronger. You wanted space. She looked at the endless open horizon before her, the vast, unbroken sweep of the prairie, a new beginning stretching out. Now she finally smiled, a full, genuine smile that reached her eyes. "I finally have mine." Sierra Vance's story isn't just about property or legal battles. It's a profound exploration of dignity, self-worth, and the ultimate power of choosing peace over perpetual chaos. Her journey teaches us that true strength isn't in clinging to what once was, but in the courage to release it, to redefine family and loyalty on one's own terms. It's a testament to the quiet, unyielding power of a woman who, when pushed to her limits, chose to document her truth rather than scream her pain. If you saw yourself in Sierra's story, if her unwavering resolve to protect her legacy and her peace resonated with you, know that her struggles and triumphs are a mirror to our own inherent strength. We are all architects of our lives, and sometimes the most powerful act of building is knowing when to dismantle what no longer serves us. Subscribe for more stories where quiet strength carves its own path and poetic justice finds its most precise expression. May you find your own boundless horizon and the unwavering calm that comes with knowing your worth.